Welcome to the Inside Knowledge for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson and this is episode 164. Today I want to talk about probiotics for IBS specifically, and I'm going to explain a bit about what is a good probiotic, like what kind of things can you look for, and then we'll think about some specific strains that are tested for constipation, some for loose stools and some for gut sensitivity. And I want to cover something about spore-based probiotics as well, because people with SIBO often get recommended those. So we've got a lot to cover in this episode. I also want to give a little plug to my book, Inside Knowledge for People with IBS and SIBO, because this information about probiotics with all the linked studies is in the book, and you can download that on Kindle or also get a hard copy delivered via Amazon. So Inside Knowledge for People with IBS and SIBO is available now. You can look up the references, find out all this information about probiotics that I'm going to talk about if you're interested in digging into the research. When I was trying to prepare for this episode, I thought, I'll just see how many recent studies have been published, because I wrote my book over a year ago now, and I just wanted to see what the latest updates were. So if you look about how many studies have been published for IBS and probiotics in the last year, there was over 1,000. And so since the 1980s, there's been a real exponential growth in investigating how microbes in our gut affect transit time, affect our health, affect our immune system. So there's so many studies, but what you have to look at is how many of these studies are actually relevant to people. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So we're trying to filter out what is a good probiotic. Now, if you don't actually know what a probiotic is, the World Health Organization defines it as a live microorganism that, when administered in adequate amounts, it confers a health benefit to the host. So this is good biotic bacteria. So they're good bacteria that have to give us, the host, a benefit. So firstly, the bacteria has to be alive when it gets to where it needs to go. For example, if you are taking a skin cream that's got a probiotic in it, the bacteria needs to be alive when it gets on your skin. The same when we're putting it in our gut. It needs to be alive when it gets to your large intestine, because that is where we want it to do its work. So sometimes we need to think about guarantees that our product is making. So there's so many different probiotics out there. We want to choose a product that has got enough live microorganisms in it, starting off, because if it doesn't have enough in the packet or in the capsule, it's not going to confer that benefit to us. So we want to know that, firstly, that the bacteria are going to be alive, secondly, that there's enough of them, and thirdly, that they do have a benefit that's been researched and tested in humans. So we really want to make sure all of those things are in place before we start throwing live microbes into our gut, particularly if you're someone who has IBS or SIBO, because you've already got a sensitive digestion, and the last thing you want to do is put in there microbes that haven't been tested for your kind of symptoms. Now, the probiotic studies that I mentioned, there was over 1,000 that had been published in the last year. And then when I filtered it down for what's been tested in humans, it only came down to 175. So quite a big difference. A lot of the tests are done in animals, or in a made-up gut, kind of in a lab setting. And so they aren't always replicated for people with our human digestion. So this is also something that's helpful to realize. There are lots of studies out there, lots of evidence, but are they good quality evidence? And is it tested in sufficient number of people to make a difference? Or did they just test it in 10 people and 5 people had a response? So it looks like, 50% of people felt better, but it's such a small handful that it might not be replicated on a larger scale. All of these things make it really difficult to understand whether probiotics are good for certain conditions. So I know I said I wanted to go into that this episode and really explain to you how you can navigate some of this out there when you're choosing a supplement. But I just wanted to sort of set that scene that it's not clear immediately, even to someone like me who spends all day talking about IBS, talking about gut symptoms and looking at this evidence, trying to find suitable products, trying to find suitable strains. it's difficult, even though I know a lot about it. And so if you know a bit about it, it's even harder, because what happens is you look on a website and it says, oh, studies say, 80% of people felt better. Okay, but like, what's the evidence and how was that study created? It's really quite a challenge, I think, generally in the wellness space, to come up with proper evidence and things that we can, really properly trust. I don't want to say that when a study's been funded by a supplement company that it's irrelevant, but we do have to look a little bit, I think, about how studies that don't give a benefit might be put to one side and never published, and then only the positive ones are published. So now that I've explained a little bit about what probiotics are, like they're live microorganisms that give us a benefit, it might be good to just think about what they are actually doing in your gut. Like, why would you take them in the first place? We hear a lot about, just take probiotics if you've got IBS. In fact, it's one of the first things people might suggest to you. If you've got SIBO, you may even find that probiotics make you worse. And that would be if you had a large overgrowth in your small intestine and you're adding in other live microorganisms. Sometimes it just upsets the cultures even more. And that can increase your bloating and increase the kind of other symptoms that you might get from SIBO. So some people don't feel good on it. And in fact, some people who have methane dominant SIBO will actually have worse results if they take probiotics. And it's been linked in a study that out of a certain group of people who had methane dominant SIBO, the ones who had the strongest and the highest levels were the ones who'd been taking probiotics. So it's not always something that we have to think about. But I'm just going to explain a bit now what the microbes are doing in your gut, and then a little bit about specific strains that may be helpful for you to consider if you think that you do need them. One of the things we get from taking probiotics is adding in new bacteria that may be missing from our diverse community of gut microbes. In the large intestine, there are trillions of different microbes, but often there's not that many different types. So the particular stool test that I sometimes run with my clients, I say sometimes because I don't do this very often, but the one that can give you a little bit of insight into your gut health, it shows you how many different types of microbes there are. And they suggest around 200 different strains is a good kind of diversity metric to aim for. Now, some people will have 200, but they're not evenly spaced. So it's also about how much space each one of those 200 is taking up. I've run a few tests where some clients have had less than 100 species because their gut diversity is really depleted. And that's because they were following a very low carb, low FODMAP diet for many years, and they weren't eating the fiber. But the reason we want diversity is because the gut microbes talk to your immune system and help to train it up. So there's a real interaction with our overall health. It's not just about what's happening in the gut. Now, when you have species, keystone species that are missing, that can change the ecology of the gut. It can change the whole environment because these keystone species have got some specific actions in terms of unlocking a pattern, like a cascade of things that are going to change in the gut. So some of these keystone species, you might have heard them from like the yogurt adverts, bifidobacterium and lactobacillus. These are two of the main species that might be quite commonly talked about in marketing. And they are really helpful because they help to unlock a whole series of activities such as fiber degradation. So helping you digest your fiber so that it's not causing so many problems. They might be changing the environment, making it a little bit more acidic. So some of the things we want the good diversity for is firstly, interacting with your immune system. That crosstalk between our cells and the microbes is really important. They're cross-talking all the time, and this two-way flow of information between these live microbes and our body helps to reset or helps to set our immune health, nervous system function, and hormone production, hormone detox. There's many things that the bacteria do. And by creating more diversity, we're really helping that process. So that's one thing. They're doing some crosstalk with our body. Secondly, they are creating a slightly more acidic environment. So in the gut, it's really helpful to create slightly more acidic, like lower pH, because that helps with nutrient absorption. So iron, for example, and zinc, some key minerals, are better absorbed when we have a slightly more acidic large intestine. So in the colon, we want it to be a little bit acidic. So all those people talking about alkaline diets and how you need to have an alkaline gut, it doesn't really make sense. Then secondly, some of the microbes, the good things that they're doing, the good microbes, is helping the mucus lining of the gut. So some microbes encourage the mucus lining, and other microbes are also taking up space so we don't have too many of those mucus degrading microbes. Episode 162, I talked about the things that you need from your gut microbes from the fiber, is protecting the mucus layer. Inside the tube of your gut, you've got a layer of mucus, and in there, some of the bacteria live and some of the bacteria are growing. So when we've got good connections and good amounts of different bacteria, then those microbes that degrade the mucus don't take up as much space. And then obviously if you're eating fiber, then they've reduce the fiber, not your gut lining. And then some microbes can also influence motility. So they're literally, with that crosstalk between your gut and your cells, they're helping to regulate the muscles that move the gut along. So you don't want it too fast, you don't want it too slow. So as you can see, there are some very specific benefits to taking probiotics for your gut, for your digestion. And so now we'll think about some specific strains that actually help you do that. But first of all, before we go into that, I just wanted to mention how some people shouldn't take probiotics. You shouldn't take any live bacteria or any live microorganisms, not just bacteria, if you are immunocompromised. So for example, if you're on chemotherapy of any kind or any immune suppressing medication, such as for arthritis, for example, because your immune system is dampened down by the medication, which means when you're adding in these extra microbes, sometimes they can overrun. Your immune system isn't going to take control of them. So we don't want to add live bacteria. So for those people, you must be very careful and completely avoid probiotics. I think even fermented foods, although you must speak to your doctor about that and work out what is suitable for you. But just to let you know, that is one case where you absolutely should not be taking probiotics. If you've got SIBO, you might consider whether it's suitable for you or whether you actually need it, because sometimes, as I said, people do feel worse on it. And then the third sort of occasion where people often feel like they need to take probiotics is after taking antibiotics. And this might be helpful, but it depends if you know you've got SIBO or not. It depends how long you took them for, what your diet is like. You know, sometimes clients can be so sensitive to very small changes. So if that's you, you don't have to take probiotics just because you have taken antibiotics. And I just wanted to put that out there because sometimes people feel like they absolutely must do it to replenish the bacteria. What we sometimes find is that the microbes hide away, like in that mucus lining, whilst you're taking antibiotics, and then they come back out as the medication stops. And your gut can recover from taking antibiotics, but it does very much depend on what was there in the first place and also your fiber in your diet. Because if you didn't have fiber before and you're not eating any fiber now, it's not likely that those microbes will rebound as easily. But also, let's be honest, even if you are taking probiotics, if you're not eating fiber, those probiotics will not stick around. When we take supplemental probiotics, they don't stay in our gut forever. They're transient, so it means that they might stay for 2 weeks. They can change the colonies of microbes. They change the vibe, the environment, if you like, but then they will go away. So a large proportion of our poo is actually made up of dead bacteria. It's turning over all the time and changing alongside the gut lining, which renews itself every 3 days. We're always getting rid of bacteria and dead ones. That's why the good bacteria, when you take them, they don't stay in you forever. But you shouldn't be taking them long term either. The most of the advice about taking probiotics is that you should take it for around 12 weeks. And if you haven't seen no improvement by then, you're not going to see any improvement after that. On balance, like obviously some people will be different. Now, I wanted to get a bit more into the specifics of particular strains that have been tested for certain symptoms for people with IBS. Couple of things to be aware of before you take a probiotic. Firstly, let's be clear on why you're taking it. What is the problem that you're hoping to solve? What is the symptom that you want to resolve? That's really important to think about because you want to be able to measure it. Has it worked? I don't really recommend just throwing probiotics in just to try and see what happens. So what we're going to look at is, has this probiotic been tested for a particular symptom? Firstly. Secondly, is it just one strain of probiotic that we're looking at, or is this a product that has multiple strains in it? Sometimes what you'll find is that certain strains have been associated with an increase in certain symptoms. So, for example, there are a couple of strains of lactobacillus that are known to increase histamine-producing microbes. Now, if you're very sensitive to histamine production and you already potentially have microbes in your gut that are adding to the histamine load, the last thing you want to do is take those probiotics. So when you've got a multi-strain mix in a product, it can be very helpful if you have low diversity. If your main purpose is to try and increase the diversity of the microbes because your fiber has been very low and you think that you need to increase your gut diversity. That might be one reason. But maybe you take a single strain probiotic, which is just the one strain that has been tested for something. But then you're maybe missing out on the diversity. So I know I'm kind of going around in circles here, but this is the kind of thing that you think about as you're starting to buy a new product, and try and think about what it's going to be doing in your gut. What is it that you need, or what is it that you want to happen from taking this new supplement? I generally try to give specific strains, either single ones, but then occasionally there is a good case for having a multi-strain probiotic that's got maybe 8 different varieties in it. Now, when you're looking at whether a strain has been tested for a certain symptom, what we're going to look at is the overall probiotic family. Then we want to look at the species within that, and then we want to look at the particular strain. So, for example, one of the main things for constipation is bifidobacterium, and there are lots of sub-levels of that bifidobacterium. You get bifidobacterium infantis, you get bifidobacterium longum, bifidobacterium animalis. There are all those different subsets. Then within that layer, you often get different strains. So, for example, bifidobacterium lactis is one of the most tested probiotics for people with constipation. And you get bifidobacterium lactis HNO19, bifidobacterium lactis BB12. So there's lots of different strains, and it's at that strain level that is where the evidence sits. So if you have seen evidence for a certain probiotic, you need to check that that particular strain is the one that's in your product, because otherwise it might not have the same results, and therefore you might not get the same benefit that you're hoping for. Part of the reason why it's so difficult to compare studies as well in this space is that some people will, or some researchers are testing just for probiotics for people with IBS, and they don't clarify whether they've got IBS-C or IBS-D and what their symptoms are like. They might be measuring different outputs as well. So sometimes they're measuring things like the IBS quality of life scores. Does this improve the quality of your life? Which is perfectly valid. But other people will focus on specific stool improvements. For example, did this improve the amount of times that you went to the toilet a week? Did this improve the consistency of your poo? These are questions that we need to pick apart as well. Like, again, it comes back to what is the point of taking this? Now, a couple of strains that I do want to just mention. So I mentioned the Bifidobacterium animalis and Bifidobacterium longum and Bifidobacterium lactis. Those are good types of probiotics that work well for people who have constipation. They have been shown to improve the number of times you go to the toilet a week, going from pooing 3 times a week to pooing 4 times a week, which is quite a big improvement and could really take some of the pressure off your abdomen just by letting a little bit more out. Other studies have shown that these particular probiotics maybe improve that sense of incomplete evacuation, so reduce that feeling that you still need to go all the time, even after you've been, but didn't change your stool frequency. The Bifidobacterium infantis one that I mentioned is also been tested for reducing abdominal pain and bloating and that incomplete evacuation feeling. So it's a good one when there's like an overall gut sensitivity issue and you're feeling constipated, bloated, and pretty stuck. That is a good strain to look for. Those Bifidobacterium are one of the first ones to go if you have not been eating much fibre. To think about whether you need them or not, if you haven't done a test to look at all the microbes in your gut, you won't necessarily know this, but you could have a think about, well, have I been eating fibre? Have I been eating any high FODMAP foods, any prebiotics like onions and garlic and wheat and apples and chickpeas? If you don't eat that food, then it's likely that the bacteria that enjoy that food are not going to be there. So let's talk a bit about the probiotics for diarrhea, and these are a bit more varied. So remember at the top I said the main common ones we talk about is Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium. Now for diarrhea, Lactobacillus reuteri DSM, so it's 17938. That is a common strain that's really good at adding or changing the environment a little bit. The other good thing about this strain is that it can help to reduce methane microbes. So sometimes people who have high overload of methane, which is often associated with constipation, but not only that, sometimes it's loose stools as well, but this particular bacteria can be helpful in that sense. So it's helpful to change the gut environment. Lactobacillus is often low in people who have not eating any dairy. If you don't eat any dairy, you may find that your levels of lactobacillus generally are lower, but not consistently. So it's not only those foods that will help it. Now, another one for diarrhea is the Bacillus coagulans. Now, these are soil-based probiotics that can sometimes help in people who have loose stools and diarrhea. So if you're like hydrogen dominant SIBO, or that you just have a lot of loose stools all the time, this might be something to consider. These can help to reduce the frequency and consistency of your bowel movements. Now, another probiotic or supplement that I like for diarrhea is Saccharomyces boulardii. Now, it's not strictly a bacteria. It is, in fact, a yeast, but it works in the same way in that it's a beneficial microbe we're adding to change the gut regularity. So I like adding this for people who have loose stools, and I've had like huge success with people doing it. Again, it's not suitable for everyone. Like if you're immunocompromised, it still wouldn't be relevant. However, it is really good at reducing the number of times people poo, and I find it very, very helpful. So that microbe that I mentioned, the Bacillus coagulans, that is a spore-based probiotic or spore probiotic that is made from soil-based bacteria and tends to be a little bit more hardy. So it often will survive the digestive process a bit more and get to your gut intact. Now, these don't make as much of an impact on people who have SIBO. So they're one of the types of bacteria that people with SIBO get on well with, in my experience. Obviously, your situation will be different. I need to keep on saying that because I'm not giving out nutritional advice here. I'm just giving you information, and then you can go and take that to your doctor, your nutritionist, your provider, or you can come and work with me and come and do this in a one-to-one setting where I can really tailor the advice. But I just wanted to highlight this type of bacteria because it's quite well protected and helps to change the gut environment. The reason that they're good for SIBO is that they don't ferment carbohydrates in the upper digestive part as well. So they do their work in the lower part of the gut, but they don't necessarily mess with the small intestine, creating that bloating and kind of sensitivity that some people do feel. I know I've done a real whistle-stop tour there. They are just a few strains to look out for, but I guess I wanted the main part of this episode to be about helping you filter the thoughts on when is a probiotic necessary? How do I make a decision on whether I need it or not? And how should I proceed when I think that I do? So I hope that some of that information will be helpful to try and block out some of the noise. So just to round it up, firstly, you do not need to always take probiotics just because you have IBS. You don't need to take them just because you've taken antibiotics. And if you do decide to take them, then you should be clear on why you're taking them and what you're hoping to get out of it. If you do decide to take them, you should also think about which particular strains you want to look for to try and improve your overall gut diversity. Is it that you want a broad spattering of lots of different microbes to try and increase your diversity? And actually, something else I forgot to mention is that a lot of people with diarrhea have low gut diversity. It's really associated with IBSD, is a lack of diversity, and that might be because of the transit time. Things are sweeping through you very quickly, and it can really reduce the ability to grow and kind of maintain a diverse microbiome. So, do think about whether you need the probiotics, because they might help you digest your fiber better, and then you can tolerate more foods. Or is it the other way around? You need more fiber, and then you'll be able to tolerate more probiotics. It's a tricky kind of decision to make. However, I wanted to leave it on that last point, is that if you take probiotics, then you need to eat fiber or they will go. They don't colonize the gut if you're not eating food. If you're not giving them a reason to hang around, they're not going to hang around. I'm going to leave it there for this week, but thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge. Better digestion for everyone.